All right, boys and girls, we are back with another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can email us, as always, at radio@thefederalist.com. I'm happy to be joined today by Libby Emmons, who is a senior editor at the Post Millennial. She's also a senior contributor at the Federalist. You can follow her on Twitter at Libby Inc., Libby with 2 8s instead of 2 Bs. Libby, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I want to talk to you about a couple of different things, but first off, I want to talk to you about this piece that you wrote for the Post Millennial, in which you
Mhm.
outlined the experience that you've had with the New York City school system involving your son. I know this is a personal topic, and so you can be as personal as you want. Uh,
Okay.
it's one of these things, though, that I think is a pretty disturbing story for lots of parents who may be facing similar things within their own schooling experience. Tell us a little bit about this story and why you wrote it.
Yeah, so I was pretty hesitant to write the story. I sat on it for more than a week, thinking about it, rewriting, editing, deciding whether or not I wanted to run it. In the end, I started seeing posts from people on other parents on Twitter and Facebook starting to be a little bit concerned about the indoctrination of elementary school students into critical race theory. And I thought that maybe it could be a useful way to get this conversation started about how to talk about racism in schools. I don't think that the way we're doing it now is actually going to have the desired effect. So, what happened was, as we all know, George Floyd was killed by police on May 25th. That led to a lot of protests, etc. It led to rioting. And on Thursday night, I guess like a little more than a week ago, I saw in my son's classroom chat on Google Classroom, which is how the school organizes its classes. I saw in Google Chat that they were going to be talking about George Floyd the next day. And I wanted to make sure that I'm always on hand when my son does his lessons. I mean, we sit here at our table and he works and I work. Call it our work nugget, and that's what we do. So I figured I would listen in, which I did. And I also decided to record it because I wanted to be able to, I mean, I had in my head that I might want to write about it. But also, I wanted to just see what was being taught and I wanted to be able to reference back anything. So his teachers came on Friday morning to talk about it. They talked an awful lot about police brutality, which of course is something that my son's dad and I have talked to him about in the past. Um, that's something that, you know, his dad has experienced firsthand, and his mom, my son's grandmom was a criminal defense attorney. So that's something that's been present, and we've talked to him about that. Um, his teachers went into detail as to the uh, visuals of the video of Mr. Floyd being killed. My son hadn't seen the video. I don't know if any of the other kids had seen the video. And then there was a lot of talk about systemic racism. The conversation about systemic racism focused primarily on the racism of the historical racism of white people in this country and the oppression and victimization of Black people in the US. So I don't think there's too many facts that are in doubt. George Floyd was killed by police. It was brutal. It was police brutality. There is a history of racism in the US. There's no way to doubt that. Why would anyone want to? The issue that I had with the lesson is how it was taught. The message that came across is that white people are responsible for racism, white people are racist, and there's no way to not be racist. The primary reason for that is that, according to my son's school, white people are racist and they don't even know it. So they can't not be racist, really. They have to do all of this digging and figure out why they're racist and then how to not be racist. And my fear is that racism is being instilled where it did not previously exist, that children are being otherized from one another. There was also this weird thing where my son is the only white kid in his class. There aren't any Black kids in his class either. So for the rest of the class, primarily, I think Chinese, Arab, Mexican, Central American, South American, either first generation immigrants themselves or the children of immigrants primarily. For them, it was more of an intellectual exercise. Their history was not called into doubt. Their mistreatment of Black people in the country was not called into doubt. And my son is just sitting there like, okay, Mom, are you racist? Is Daddy racist? Are my grandparents racist? And it's by perpetuating this idea that there's nothing you can do about it, it's like really defeatist. Mm-hmm. But I was still really hesitant to write about it, and with some of the backlash I've gotten, I was right to be hesitant to write about it.
What has some of the reaction been to your piece about this?
Well, there's like two different reactions that I find almost equally distasteful. There's the heavily progressive leftist reaction. That's basically that I'm teaching my son to be racist. And then there's the sort of right-wing reaction that is basically, all of these leftists are terrible and should be killed, which is also not the answer. Like none of that is the answer. So yeah, those are the primary reactions I've been getting.
What did your son tell you after the class was over?
I wanted to talk to him about it. He just wanted to go retreat to his room and watch YouTube. So which is not normally what he wants to do after class. Normally he wants to like hang out and tell me that I'm working too much and that he doesn't want me to work anymore. So I figured if he's trying to hide out, I should talk to him about it. And he felt uneasy. He felt uncomfortable about the videos that were shown. And he had a feeling where he felt pity for the Black kids in the video who were being shown as these victims. And I don't think it's reasonable for my son, who's a New Yorker, born and raised in Brooklyn, very diverse community in our neighborhood and of course across the borough and across the city. The school funding in this city is not really neighborhood by neighborhood. I mean, parents raise money and that money goes into the schools, but the city gives the same amount of money for every kid. All the teachers in the New York City public school system are required to have master's degrees. They take rigorous testing, by which I mean to say, I do not think that there's a level of inequality that is perpetrated by the city with regard to education. Mm-hmm. But yeah, his reaction was that he felt bad. He felt bad about our family, and he felt bad for these kids who are victims of white supremacy. I don't think he should be feeling pity for any of his peers. For any fourth graders in the city, I think he should feel a kinship with them. They're all fourth graders in the same enormous public school system. He should feel a sense of kindness and respect for his fellow students. He shouldn't feel like he is either better or worse than any of them for any reason. The very idea is sort of shocking that this is what was being instructed. And I don't think it was the intent of the instruction. I think the intent of the instruction was to perpetrate feelings of anti-racism, to make every kid in the class feel like it's their responsibility to stand up for injustice when they see it. But I don't think that will be the result of these lessons. And that's the problem.
What do you think was the real aims? You said that you think that they wanted to inculcate anti-racism. Do you think that's all that was going on there? Was there some element of shame that they wanted to pass along to these children or via them to their parents?
I think that there was a level of shame, and I don't think that it was entirely intentional. I think it was sort of a side result. My son's teachers are white, and I think they felt shame. I think they felt shame for, the legacy of systemic racism, et cetera, that they have, of course, learned. They have all been required to take anti-unconscious bias training. And I think that they've been heavily affected by this. They all have master's degrees in education. You can't get a master's degree in education without, you know, an intensive, progressive leftist education. So I think they felt ashamed, and I think they wanted to make sure that that shame came through. I think there was definitely some virtue signaling going on in terms of, we know, you know, from the teacher's perspective, from the school's perspective, we know how terrible this was. We want to make sure that you know that we know how terrible this was, that this happened. We want to make sure that you guys know that we, the teachers, are opposed to rioting and don't think that rioting and protests have anything in common. You know, I think it was a lot of progressive talking points. And while I don't think that their intention specifically was to make my son feel ashamed of being a white person or of his family, I do think that one of the tenets of critical race theory is that white people should feel ashamed of themselves and their backgrounds. And I don't think that that's a very useful way to educate kids. There was, I'm sure you've seen it, Van Jones went on TV and said that all white people have the virus of racism in their heads. And there's something that happens when my son has difficult math problems that he has to do. So let's say it's, you know, now we have to do it on the computer. It's like even worse, so annoying. So let's say he has this mountain of math problems. He sees the stack of papers, or, you know, the endless number of Google Slides, which is now what it is, where you have to fill in text boxes. He sees that, he sees the problems, he sees the explanation. It's overwhelming. It feels like he's never going to get through that pile of work. And he says, "Mom, I'm just bad at math. I don't want to do it. I can't do it. I'm just bad at math." And then what ensues is like hours of trying to get him to do it until we give up and come back to it some other time, which, you know, it's endless. But he feels defeated. He feels defeated by math problems. And there's not even any conversation about how he's always going to be bad at math, and his parents were bad at math, and everything in his brain is bad at math, and there's a virus in his brain that makes him bad at math. So what is the lesson of, you know, your family is racist and you have racism inside of you that you don't even know is there, and you have to dig it out, and your parents are racist and your grandparents are racist, and racism is passed down in white families? What are you going to do with that other than to feel like there's nothing you can do about racism, that you can't possibly be anti-racist? All you can do is, I mean, what are the options? The options are to say, okay, I'm going to tackle this problem knowing, as I've just been taught by my teachers, that there's pretty much nothing I can ever do about it, because there were no solutions offered, right? There's no solutions offered as to what a group of, you know, 10-year-old Brooklyn kids can do about systemic racism. In fact, the end of the 2-day lesson was about how you should be kind to each other and have respect for each other, which is a lesson that is all by itself the lesson. That's the lesson. Be kind, be generous of your heart, be respectful to all people. Don't assume that a person's skin color gives you any information about who they are, right? Don't assume that because a person has a disability that gives you any information about who they are. And at a certain point, that, which when I was growing up, this was the colorblind model of, you know, not being racist. That model has been substantially overturned, so that the new model is that a person's skin color does tell you something about them, and your skin color tells you something about yourself, whether you came to it of your own accord, or looked at your exterior and then determined that that exterior gives you information about yourself that you may not otherwise have had. I think that, and I've been following this for a while because I know that this is inappropriate to say, and you're not supposed to say this as a white person, but like, I'm pretty sure that I'm not racist, right? So as like, I don't think it's that hard to not be racist either. It's like, there aren't a lot of reasons to make assumptions about people based on their skin color or their ethnic background. There's just it doesn't make any sense. Anyways, so I've been interested, as this colorblind model has been overturned. As you know, I came out of the arts. The arts is where this stuff has been bubbling up for decades. Several years ago, I was having drinks with an old friend of mine from college. She's Black. We were talking about colorblind model of being not racist. And she was saying that she's completely opposed to that idea of colorblindness, and that she wants people to gather information about her and her Blackness based on her skin color. That she wants people to see her Blackness, that's important. And that makes a certain amount of sense if that's part of how she wants to operate in the world. Like, sure, that's her choice as to how she wants to identify and how she wants to exist. But I do think that identification, personal identification with a culture that has as its signifier your skin color, makes a lot more sense when there is a specific culture that is associated with that. And I think it is a mistake to take whiteness as the equivalent of Blackness in the United States, because I don't think whiteness is a cohesive thing. I think the push to make whiteness its own culture, as opposed to what came before whiteness, which was like, regionalism, for example. You have your friends who are like seriously into being from Georgia, or, my family's from New England. We're all kind of into being from New England. We think it's neat, or like the people who were Italian, and it's like they used to be Italo-Americans, or like there's Norwegians, or, the Irish have a great big Irish American pride thing. We have giant St. Patrick's Day celebrations, or whatever it is. So I think that there's a difference between
Yeah.
those two things. And maybe it's racist to say that. I don't know, like, if that's now part of the thing that you're not supposed to say. But I do find that, so when a lot of this stuff started coming up several years ago, when I was more engaged with the progressive left, I saw all of these articles about like, dear white parents, you need to like talk to your children about being anti-racist. And I was like, okay, if that's like, maybe that's the thing we're doing now, let's look at that. So I thought like, okay, I'll talk to my son about this stuff. And it was right around when Tamir Rice was killed, which, I mean, my goodness, like, this is a 12-year-old kid killed by cops. I was horrified by this. My son was listening to the radio with me as this came on. As a mom, I was just like really overcome with the horror of this. So I talked to him about it. At the time, he was like, Mom, why are you so upset? And we talked about it. And I tried to employ some of these ideas of like how these new critical race theory instructions as to how to talk to your child about race. I was like, okay, let me see, maybe this is the thing. His takeaway as a little kid was that I didn't have to worry about him getting shot in a playground, because he said, my skin isn't dark. That was his takeaway. that's not the takeaway. Like that's not the takeaway. Isn't like, don't worry about me, I'm protected from law enforcement because I'm a white person. That's not the takeaway. Like, if there is a takeaway that involves your own skin color, it shouldn't be that one. It should be like, it's not right that police may think that I'm less of a threat, right? But he's a little kid. He's not going to get there. In high school, perhaps we could have a different kind of conversation. But for a little kid, and now for a fourth grader, because of, I think, the way that child psychology goes, he's not going to get the lesson that you want. He's going to get some other lesson that is exactly the opposite of the lesson that we want. His friends, by virtue of where we live, are pretty much not white kids. They just all like Minecraft. Like, none of this matters. Yeah, I find it really troubling. I feel like as a result of lessons designed or intended to make my kid less racist, they are pushing him more toward being a racist. And so I'm then undoing all of this stuff, and then, he's asking me like, about Martin Luther King Jr. And I'm like, well, let's watch his Nobel Prize speech. Let's listen to this. This is a pretty good speech. And I'm trying to like undo all of this stuff and bring in, for me personally, bring in the lessons of Jesus Christ and say like, what would Jesus say about any of this? Everybody is equal in God's eyes. Everyone's equal in our eyes. There's no difference between you and the, Chinese kids or the Arab kids. They're,
Have you by any
same.
chance talked to other parents of kids who are in your son's class about their reactions to it?
No, I'm actually supposed to meet up with, I'm trying to make friends with one of the moms who is the mom of one of my son's best friends, so that, because you have to like meet the moms before anybody's allowed to go over to anybody's houses. So I'm like trying to make that happen. But I don't know a lot of the parents in this school. I know some, but not a lot. I've talked to other parents of kids this age who are not in this school, mostly white parents who think that I'm totally gone off the edge of the boat here.
I'm just curious what their reactions might be and how they might be similar or different, because I think that as someone who writes about things in this space, you're probably very well attuned to it. But I would assume that most parents probably just assume, oh, well, the teachers probably know what they're doing. They're just teaching them to not be racist and it'll all be fine.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm very anxious to talk to some of the other moms. I'm hoping we can work this out. This meetup at the park is what I'm hoping we can work out primarily, so that the kids can play together. But
what if
I missed you? You cut out.
I said, what have your experiences generally been like in the New York public school system?
They've not been bad. My son was in private school until this year. This year is fourth grade. We moved him into this school because his school closed down, so that was no longer an option. He'd been to Catholic school, he'd been to different schools, so we wanted to give this a shot. Generally, I find the teachers to be really dedicated, really hardworking. They're always available for questions about the curriculum or how things are going. There's lots of extra services and there's lots of resources. They don't let them run at recess, which drives me insane. And all of the other kids as well drives them insane.
What's their rationale for that?
For not letting them run? They're worried that they're going to hurt themselves. But it's kind of like, okay, then hurt yourself. Like, run. Maybe you'll fall down. Maybe you'll bang into other kids. But like, so what? Run around.
Well,
yeah.
it's hard to.
So that's not great.
Yeah, it's hard to get rid of energy when you don't allow them to do that. You mentioned earlier, and I do want to spend just a few minutes on the fact that you came out of the world of the creative space of theater. The world there is one that is going through significant upheaval at the moment. as it
Mm-hmm.
relates to all of these questions. What are the main trend lines as you see it within the theater and creative space world? And do you think this is a situation where basically everything new that's going to be created for a little while here is going to be about race in some way or the other?
I actually wrote about this today for the Post Millennial. I wrote about what's going on in the theater world, and there's a lot in that question. The theater world, the theater industry, artists in general, but specifically in the dramatic arts, are very anxious to twist them into whatever pretzel shapes are necessary to do the right thing, whatever that thing may be, to make sure that equity and equality are um, implemented on theatrical stages. There's a big thing in theater where you have white trust fund girls starting theater companies and spending their parents' money on that stuff. That's been criticized for a long time, but also these are the people who are then creating opportunities, opening stages, opening theater companies, and inviting in artists to, style on that dime. Um, so for years, there's been a push from not only Black artists and artists of color, but from white artists who want the theater world to be a more diverse space, to tell broader stories, to tell bigger stories. So there's kind of an interesting thing that happened. There's always been a lot of white people in charge theater. They had this expendable money, inherited, what have you, and they started to get the word that they should open up their spaces. So they started commissioning um, writers and actors and trying to make stories about, trying to present Black stories. So they did that, and then they did that for a while, and then lately there's been pushback against those stories because those are the wrong stories being told about Black culture, about communities of color. I remember being in a grad school class and we were talking about the dramaturgy class. We were at Columbia. We were talking about Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which is a great play. And I think there was one Black student in the class, and he freaked out. He was just like, "I'm so tired of these stories about the downtrodden Black person. Why is this the only story that we ever get to see about Black people?" So that makes sense. Okay, like broaden the story. There's stories from a Venezuelan playwright that I know who had a commission to write a play about a Latina. She wrote a play about a woman who is Latina, but her being Latina was not like the main focus of the story. And so she got pushed back because it wasn't Latin enough. It didn't satisfy the flavor that they were looking for, like they were looking for Venezuelan food. And instead, I think they got something about a New England prep school. So, because that's where she went, like, so I think what's happening is that the theater industry really wants to do the right thing. They are consistently listening to the messages, or trying to, and I'm sure that people would say, no, they're not, they're just racist, but whatever. They're trying to listen to the messages of artists of color to do that right thing. And then when they do it, they're told that that's not enough either. There was an article written by someone on Medium, written by this actress, who said that white people need to start turning down roles. You need to start like saying no to gigs in order that a person of color gets the gig. I think that's crazy. I just think that's insane. There's a little theater company downtown where the writing company and the acting company, it's called the Flea Theater, are getting together to overthrow the white lady who has been doing all of the fundraising and making that space possible for it's pretty much its entirety. They're gonna, try and kick her out. I don't know how the theater survives without all her rich friends throwing money at it, but maybe the stage isn't a worthwhile, maybe that's not a worthwhile stage. I don't know. It's just going to keep eating itself.
Yeah.
So no matter to what lengths. And if the theater industry can't do it, no industry can do it, because the theater industry wants to change. They want to put whatever it is that makes them not racist up front. They really don't want to be racist. They really don't want to be any of the things. They don't want to be homophobic or transphobic or ableist. They don't want to be any of that stuff. And the theater industry obviously isn't homophobic. I mean, it's absurd. But yeah, but they can't do it, because everything they try ends up being the wrong thing. A letter went out to the white theater community that was signed by, it was all like artists of color who had signed the letter, but these are also the most well-known names in American theater: Lin-Manuel Miranda, Lynn Nottage, David Henry Hwang, Rajiv Joseph. Like, these are people with huge productions under their belt. These are the names of theater. Like, I don't think I could name you white theater artists who are like famous, or I don't even know any, you know. And who cares? Like, what like, who cares? It doesn't matter. Like, let the best work, the work that everybody wants to see, let that come to the fore. I think that's definitely been true with Hamilton, which is of course such a brilliant show. But this was a letter to the white theater industry saying, all the times you tried not to be racist were really racist, and that's just not acceptable. Yeah. You tried to tell our stories and you told the wrong ones. You tried to give us funding and instead we just felt tokenized. You tried to employ our actors and you had them doing plays that are not actually lifting up our community. You're the problem. Stop doing what you're doing. And the white theater community is going to say, okay, please tell us what to do. Just tell us and we'll do it. And then what you're going to have is like, it's not our job to educate you. You need to do this work yourself. White people, go talk amongst yourselves, figure out how not to be racist, and then come back to us and we'll tell you if you succeeded or not. It's just an absurdity. And if this is the kind of thing that's going to be bubbling up from the arts, as so many things bubble up from the arts, you know, the whole transgender thing bubbled up from the arts. If this is what's going to be coming into culture, then there are really not that many options. There's either fold, stop doing the work altogether, take your money and go home, you know, take your ball, don't play with the other kids, they're being mean to you, whatever, go home, or just don't apologize and keep doing your work. And the lack of apology is, of course, an indicator of unconscious bias, and you're racist. And then I saw something, a writer I know who I follow on Twitter was saying that, what was it? Oh, that the word racist needs to, he's a Black writer, the word racist needs to stop being thought of as a bad word, right? It's just a descriptor. You're just racist. It's just a descriptor. It's not a big deal. But of course, it's a canceling word. It's a word that costs you your job. It's a word that costs you your theater space and your friends and your funding and everything else. So, I mean, if you call somebody a racist, like, that's not, you don't want to be that person. You don't want to be the racist. You know what I mean? Yeah, so that's what I think. I think if the arts can't survive this, then nobody has a shot.
Libby Emmons is a senior editor at the Post Millennial. You can follow her on Twitter at Libby Inc. That's with 2 H's instead of 2 B's. Libby, thanks so much for taking the time to tell us your story about your son and everything else.
Thanks so much.
I'm Ben Domenech. You've been listening to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. We'll be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.